you're here for the part 2 of Oro Valley, the first 50 years. Last month we had a great presentation Jim gave us about the whole book. Now we're going to pick out some certain parts of it. The Oro Valley Historical Society is really honored to have Jim Williams as a lifetime member, a past president, and our current historian. And after you sit through today, which is going to be very interesting, you'll know why he is our historian. So I'm going to introduce Jim Williams to you, and he will introduce the panel, and I know you all will enjoy the afternoon. Thanks again for coming.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Great. We have a series of programs planned that are going to be panel discussions. The one next month, and have it here, there's a few handouts in the back, but the one on March 11th will be 3 mayors. The current mayor and 2 former mayors, Mayor Hierbath and Mayor Loomis. And we'll have a discussion about change that they've seen in the community. And then April 8th, we're going to have 3 people who were involved in the original incorporation period. And they'll be speaking in a panel like this. So I hope you can attend as many of those as possible. Today we're going to be talking about how the community has changed in the 50 years since that time. None of the people here go back a full 50 years in that, but they have a wealth of experience in the town. On my far right, Dave Perry was the editor of The Explorer in the early 2000s. He's been the president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, and he's now again working as a newspaper reporter. The next, Kathi Cuvelier, was a town employee back in 1980, and she retired in 2011, and she served as the town clerk for most of that time. And Spencer Elliott has been a resident since, on my immediate right, Spencer Elliott has been a resident since 1985, and he's been involved in many political campaigns and activities all through this period. So these people have seen a lot of what's going on over the last 30, 35 years of Oro Valley. So my first question, and I'm going to ask Spencer to answer this first, is why did you move here, or why did you begin to work here in the case of Kathi? And, when and why, and how did you get here?
Is this on?
Yeah. Oh, let's see here. I think everybody better power on their mics.
Okay. Now it's on.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we moved here, really, my wife and I, for a job change. I worked for what was then called Air Research Manufacturing Company of California, which ultimately many of you who are newer in the town only know as Honeywell up here on the northwest side now. But when it started, we were down by the airport on Elvira Street. And that job change was a kind of a major life change. And we lived in northern Colorado at the time. And I had 2 job offers, one with Ball Brothers in Boulder, and the other one was with Air Research here in the Tucson area. And my wife was smart enough to say, the company is going to move you, so why don't you go where people retire, so when you get ready to retire, you don't have to move. So that's why I let her make a lot of the decisions in my family.
Go ahead, Kathi.
Okay. Well, I applied for the deputy clerk position back in, actually prior to 1980. And my interview was a little interesting to start So I was moving into a new apartment, and I had a friend that had another friend that helped us move. And she started asking me questions about my prior experience and so forth, and I'm answering the questions. And then she said, would you like to apply for the deputy clerk position at the town of Oro Valley? And you would meet with the mayor and council and talk with them. So I did that, and I was hired January 2nd of 1980 as deputy town clerk. And so I was fortunate enough, and that just began a really wonderful change in my life and a wonderful career.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be with you. My name's Dave Perry, and Lisa and I moved to Oro Valley December 1st of 2007, so I'm much more recent to the community than my colleagues to the left. And I came to be the publisher and editor of the Explorer newspaper. The paper had been sold to a publisher from Colorado, and we moved from Scottsdale to Oro Valley. We rented a house on the north end of Oro Valley, if you know High Mountain View Place. And when we first came here, my commute, I drove down Oracle Road, and Oro Valley Marketplace was being scraped and built at the time that we moved to Oro Valley. I worked at the Explorer 3 years, and then we parted ways. And then I ran the Chamber of Commerce in Oro Valley for 11 and a half years. And we love living here. We think it's a great place, and I hope to spend the rest of my days here.
Great. A question that I plan to ask for almost all of these is, because so many of us have come at different times here, what did this community look like to you when you moved here? And how different was it than today? Spencer, why don't you start first, because you have the earliest experience, well, some of the earliest experience.
Well, it looked a lot different, that's for sure.
Yeah.
There were less than 3,000 people in the town. One of the first political activities that my wife and I ever got ourselves involved with was the annexation of Rancho Vistoso, which was not in Oro Valley at the time. It was a very small town at that point.
Maybe hold a little closer.
And it was Kathi Engel, if any of you remember that name. Kathi was the wife of Mayor Steve Engel, who was the mayor for the longest time here in Oro Valley. I think he was the third mayor, if I'm correct. And she came by one time with a petition, and she just said, do you think that the people in Rancho Vistoso should have the right to vote as to whether they want to be in the town or not? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, it seems like people ought to be able to make their own decisions as to whether they want to be incorporated or not incorporated. So we signed the petition, and from there, it just kind of mushroomed into a whole bunch of other things. But from the early days, and I don't have all of the stories in here, and Jim probably has them in his book, if you talk to the people who have been in town longer than I, of the notorious Oro Valley speed trap story as to how that came about, and what many of the town people did, the town employees did, after every rain when the streets would fill up with sand, and they would go out with pickup trucks and shovels. And instead of coming into the town that day, they would go and they would shovel sand out of the streets, because it was the only street cleanup that we had in the town at that particular time. So I don't know if that gets an answer to everything you're looking for, Jim.
What were you referring to as far as the speed trap?
Well, the speed trap really was, we didn't really have a lot of police at the time. In fact, kind of the funny story, our neighbor was a man named John Dillon, and he and his wife Hope were from Kansas. They knew each other back in their high school days, and eventually married different people and moved their own ways, and then both lost spouses. So they got back together, and when the town was looking to incorporate, it needed to have a police official. And I think it might have been Steve Engel at the time, but it might have been somebody, one of the mayors before, asked John if he would be willing to take on that job, because we're looking for someone to be the police official to sign the incorporation papers and all that. So he thought about it for a little bit and decided, well, it's kind of a natural if you're from Kansas and your last name is Dillon. You should be called Marshal Dillon. So that was our first police official that came to the town at that point.
Okay. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. I'll just continue on. So when I started work in 1980, I was the deputy town clerk, but in March of 1983, I was appointed as the town clerk for the town. And so just to give you a little bit about the demographics of the area, so Oro Valley was still 4 square miles, and Oracle Road was still a 2-lane highway. We had the official 1980 census at that time was 1489 for population. And I worked at the Kathi Concordia location. 680 West Kathi Concordia at that time was the official town hall. And that included everything needed there. The 2 back bedrooms, it was a former house where the police department, the chief's office, and the squad room. And then the dining room with the council chambers, and the living room was all the administrative services. So everything you needed, you come to 680 West Kathi Concordia to get help. And I was the 10th employee to be hired, which meant that we could qualify now for group insurance, get a special rate on insurance for town employees. Also, around the area, there was only, to the east of east of the town hall was Canyon Dollar High School that had been there since the early 60s. And then Linda Vista Citrus Tracts to the west of the town hall, there was a farmer, Orville Shields, who had a peach orchard and did quite well selling peaches there. And also there was Shadow Mountain Estates and Oro Valley Estates Country Club in that area. And then there was a 7-Eleven at Hardy and Oracle, which is now the Kathy Soenvac building. And let's see, that was about it. Oro Valley was very rural in its nature. And at that time, anything north of Kathi Concordia, it was just desert, and that was about it. So, seen a lot of changes since that time.
It might have been, the population of cattle might have been higher than the number of people
Could have been.
at that point. Yeah.
Yes, because the Rancho Vistoso area used to be an area for cattle to graze many years ago,
Yes.
before the land swap.
So Dave, you came in the mid to late 90s. What do you see as the difference of then versus now?
Well, I came in '07, and we saw and remember, I ran a business and community organization for a number of years, and I paid a lot of attention to apartment communities, and we saw 3 major apartment communities come into Oracle Road. One thing I have really been astonished by, frankly, is the growth in senior living, the senior care communities. And today I drove past La Posada Push Ridge down off of First Avenue, which is an amazing facility and large. And I remember a friend of mine, Lynette Jaramillo, the late Lynette, who ran Casa de la Luz Hospice, founded it. And one time I said to her, "What's all this senior living?" And she said, "Remember that we have low taxes, we have a great place to live, we're clean, we're safe, and we've got weather that people care about." So that industry is always going to be in this community, and it's always going to grow. And I accept that, of course, and recognize that. When we came here, La Cañada was still 2 lanes, and there was the big fight on the south end of La Cañada, north of Ina, about what kind of a road was going to be put in, what sort of walls and things like that, and a very contentious subject. Now we look at it and say, well, it's just how it is. And those days, by the way, Oracle Road was just as bumpy as I remembered it until we finally got it resurfaced here several years ago. But the growth piece has been consistent in my time here, and I give credit to mayors and councils that the quality of growth in this community has been exceptional. And Jim points that out in his book, that the look of Oro Valley is without peer, frankly, in southern Arizona. And I lived in Scottsdale for 7 months when I first moved to Arizona, and Scottsdale's a nice place, but it's not Oro Valley.
Yeah.
Dave, you kind of got into that question. My next question, why so many people have moved here? The weather is great, the mountains are great, but of course, the whole area has the weather and the mountains. That's not just ours. The question would be, why do we grow from 800 or 900 people to 47,000? Spencer, what do you think?
Well, I know when we first came, part of the reason that people wanted to live here was safety. I think we were either the first or the second safest town in the U.S. at that time in the mid-1980s. Again, all the things that have been mentioned, it's a nice place to live. And as I say, my reason for moving here was my job change effectively required that I move here. And psychologically, I can't explain why other people do, but I think they see the same sorts of things that we found here. And we found really kind of interesting talking to people over the 35 years or however many years. People either love this part of the world or they hate this part of the world. They don't seem to be neutral about this part of the world. And I don't really understand why that is, but then my education was not in psychology, but engineering. So that's beyond me to answer that question.
Kathi?
Well, I think both of you have mentioned a lot of the reasons why people do come to Oro Valley. Definitely the lifestyle, the safety, public safety is so important, especially these days. You know, you can come into Oro Valley and you're not going to have any issues with major crime. You feel safe, and the residents love that feeling of the safety. And ever since I was with the town, the police department has the dark house program, so that if you're going on vacation and need to leave, you know that you can just register with the police department. They'll check your house while you're on vacation, and that is a level of safety for the residents. Oro Valley, we didn't always, but we now have many parks and amenities for families. This is a great place for families to live. And of course, when Sun City Vistoso came into Oro Valley, we have a nice retirement area as well. We used to have the reputation as a bedroom community, but that has totally changed. And it seems to be there's a lot of different things for all age levels to enjoy.
Great. I gave the three people the questions of answer so they could think about them. One question I asked was, what individuals do you think have had the greatest impact on the town? Can you maybe pick just one person to talk about that you think has had some impact on the town, and how have they done so? Dave, do you want to start?
Sure, and I'm going to bring up somebody that you may not think about so much, and it's Dr. Tom Grogan. And Tom is the founder of Ventana, and he brought Ventana to Oro Valley. Paul, you remember when that was? Mid-'80s, I believe, maybe even later than that. But Dr. Grogan and the people at Ventana, now Roche, they are a world-class company that does remarkable things in our community. And by the way, they employ 1,800 people in Oro Valley. Wow. And you know, it's the biggest bioscience company in southern Arizona by a number of folds there. And I think that they bring a vitality to this place. They bring high education, high achievement. They also bring a ton of jobs. And, you know, they just bought the old Sanofi building up in Innovation Park to further expand their footprint in our community. And I give Dr. Grogan, who's a wonderful man, if you ever get a chance to read his book, I know the mayor has. It's a terrific book, Chasing the Invisible. But his decisions and the decisions of others at Ventana years ago have had a lot of influence on our community.
Okay. Spencer?
Well, trying to narrow this down to one.
Yeah, it's hard.
Well, one or two.
Well, I was back on the one here, Jim. So
Okay.
this could sound somewhat biased in some ways, but I'm going to have to say that my wife was, for really two reasons. One was when we came to town and first got into any of the political atmosphere that was going on in Oro Valley, every development that came in to the town had to be approved in all its gory detail, all the way down to what the roadbeds were supposed to look like by the town council.
Yeah.
And it was, I know my wife asked the question when she was on the council at the time, says, why do we have to go and do all this kind of stuff? Can't we just adopt standards that already exist since we don't seem to have one for ourselves? And there was a lot of pushback about that, but eventually she was able to facilitate a change, and we adopted the Pima County standards. And then since that time, the town, of course, will modify where needed to meet whatever specific issues go on with the town. But prior to that, the council meetings were mostly taken up with more civil engineering tasks than any governance sort of activities on the thing. And the other, I want to say that I think she had a big influence on, because I remember her saying, I've never signed a check that big, is when the town bought the Metro Water Company, so that the town controlled its own water destiny instead of allowing the Tucson Water to buy up metropolitan water.
You mean, is this your wife Lee, or was that someone else?
No, that was Lee that did that
Okay.
stuff on the thing. Since you mentioned Lee, that was always an interesting thing too. Sometimes you'll see her name written with quotes around Lee, but that really was her middle name. Her first name was Lynetta, and everybody thought Lee was a diminutive of that, but no. The funny story in the family, not to make this too long, was that her mother wanted to have 2 boys and a girl, and then Lee came along first, and she didn't have any boys' names picked out. So she told her husband to go name her. So he didn't have any boys' names picked out either, or any girls' names picked out, rather. So he went down and named her after 2 ex-girlfriends.
Oh my gosh, wow.
It was a
Okay.
controversy, I'm sure, that went for years in the family. But that's some of the history of what's happened here.
Yeah, thank you. Kathy?
Okay, well, as you say, there's so many that I can think of, so many names over the years, but I've got to start with James D. Cree, who was the original founder of the town. And in 1968, he saw and heard that City of Tucson wanted to annex from mountain to mountain. And also, I think there was a planned Pima County substation where the park, where the James D. Cree Park is now. And he decided that it was time for Oro Valley to shape its own destiny. So he contacted Steve Engel, who was also one of the original incorporators, and the two of them worked together to incorporate Oro Valley. And it took till 1974 to incorporate the town, but as you probably know the story, a lot of legal issues and battles to try to become incorporated, but it did happen. And those two, along with so many volunteers and others, helped and had this vision of what they wanted Oro Valley to be. And
I would chime in on that as a historian. I think very important were Jim and Marjorie Cree, because they saved a huge amount of documentation
Yes.
on the early history of the town, not just the incorporation, but the first 7 or 10, 12 years of the town, which would have all disappeared had they not saved that material.
Yeah.
So it's been very important.
absolutely, I would agree with that. And Jim's wife, Marjorie, as you say, she was the town's first historian. And so, yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, I think we have to stop for a second, so
Okay.
Paul. Okay, very good. Next question. What do you think have been some of Oro Valley's government's successes over the years? I know we've alluded to a few things like the police and other things. What do you think is really some of the things that the government has done right here? Dave, how about you start with that one?
Sure. One subject that I think is undertold in this community is our water utility, and how, and I don't have the specific statistics in front of me, but I believe that Oro Valley uses less groundwater now than it did in 2006, 2007, even though our population has grown. And, we've diversified water supply. We now have wet Central Arizona Project water that enters into our supply. Of course, we've brought the reclaimed water to golf courses and park spaces, and it's a remarkable story. Everybody frets about water, but our community, thanks to leadership, is pretty well positioned to get through all this and, in fact, lead in terms of the way that we use that precious resource and how we might be able to responsibly grow with it as well.
Okay. Kathi?
Okay, well, I would say, when the town incorporated, it did so with the promise at that time that they would not enact local property tax, and that they wanted to control the town's growth and have a strong police protection, good roads, listen to the residents. And at that time, they had a vision of wanting Oro Valley to look like a Paradise Valley or a Scottsdale. And also, the town has always been fiscally responsible, always strive to maintain a balance between what the residents want with the developers, but also having to live within the Arizona state law to honor the property owner rights of the developers that were developing in the town. And I think they've done a pretty good job all through the years of trying to do that. And it's not easy to do.
Thank you. Spencer, what do you think have been some of the success? You already mentioned water as one of them.
Well, the water definitely is one of them, and I have to echo what has already been said by my colleagues here. I don't know if there's really a lot that I can add to that as successes. I think possibly thinking about how the council has been restructured over the years might be considered a success because it's opened the town up more to a democratic possibility than was there before. When we first came, the council members were all elected by the people in the town. The mayor was selected really to be the chairman of the council. And they chose the mayor amongst themselves. The people didn't have any say as to who was going to be the mayor. And it was necessary. Somebody had to sign all the paperwork officially for the town, so somebody had to be in charge. And that's how they selected that. So I think probably one of the big successes is the recognition that we needed to make this change here in the town. And I think it's for the better. We've expanded the council, and now we have direct election. So I think it's a more democratic process now than it was in the early days.
Plus, the size of the council was expanded too, from 5 to 7. Yeah. What sort of things might the town have done differently or better in your view? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I'll go first.
Sure.
I was just going to say, I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer that question. So I don't really have an opinion on that, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine. Sure. Dave, any ideas?
Well, again, my tenure here is shorter duration. I look at the marketplace and I see the incentives that were approved by the voters. And, the marketplace has struggled for so many reasons. And now I think we've found a way forward to create apartments there, create more of the mixed use kind of a redevelopment, honestly, of the marketplace. And when I first came to Oro Valley, and the late, great Bill Adler was prominent in our community, and he's somebody that should be mentioned as well as prominent, but Bill didn't like the whole concept of mixed use, as I recall, and but that's changed, and I think modern council and others have recognized that in order for a place like the marketplace to succeed, we have to do something different than what was envisioned originally, and I think we're heading in the right direction there.
Looks good.
Great, thank you. Citizen involvement, there have been many contentious meetings in the history of this town from the very beginning. And my question is, has that been a good or a bad thing of citizen involvement, and particularly most commonly related to land use decisions?
Okay.
Spencer?
Well, I think you do have to have the citizens involved in this, otherwise they're sitting out there and they're just kind of grumbling. If it does make for contentious meetings, I know there were many times, and Kathy, you can attest to this too, as to how many hours the council meetings went on, giving everyone an opportunity to speak. And then, of course, as the town population grew and the town hall got bigger and more seats went in, and I think it was Steve Engel who brought in an egg timer and said, you have 3 minutes to make your point to the council. And when the sand runs out, you have to sit down. And that kind of moved things along a bit. I'm not saying that it sped things up too much, because there were still an awful lot of speakers. But I think without citizen involvement, you don't really have a town.
Very true. And the egg timer was before we had the limit timer, which is the electronic little thing that tracks your time. But
Right, yeah.
yeah, citizen involvement has always been very important to Oro Valley. And it's impacted the town in a number of ways in the government. So we have from so many volunteers that give of their time and talents, so many of them just out of the goodness of their heart because they cared for the community, have helped this community for 50 years, the past 50 years. And I think without the citizen involvement, we wouldn't be the community that we are today. Done a lot of good help. And just like the Oro Valley Historical Society, doing what you're doing, you're not a paid committee, you're just doing it because you love your community and want to preserve the history. Thank you.
I might have a longer answer than my colleagues here. I spent 28 years as a small town newspaper reporter, editor, and publisher in Wyoming. And I've been to a lot of government meetings over the years, tons of them. And when I first came to the Explorer, we had a very rocky relationship in Marana. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna try to fix that. And I met with mayor and town managers and developed relationships there. And I went to Marana town council meetings for 3 years. And there were many times when I was one of a handful of people in the audience. There just was not the sort of participation that we see in this community. And even in Wyoming, I would see when an issue was super inflammatory, sure, there were a ton of people there, but not on a consistent basis as we've seen in Oro Valley. Now, it's changing a little bit because of pandemic, and now we've got technology where people can plug in from home and participate in council meetings, but I've never seen a place where the citizens were this involved in the day-to-day decisions that go on. And again, remember my context of, I ran a business organization. I know those developers, and they used to complain. It's better. It's gotten better over the years than it was, but I'm not a subscriber to the phrase that time is money. I don't equate those two things. But I do know that in business, time costs money. And the longer things go on in the decision-making process, however legitimate and valid it may be, business people see that as a negative, and it's more difficult. The other side of that coin, of course, is that when they get into business in Oro Valley, and they've gone through all the public processes, I walk in and say, how's business? And almost invariably they say, it's great. Because they have access now to this wonderful market, if you will. And I draw the market lines, by the way. I go to Dove Mountain, and I go to Saddlebrook and Saddlebrook Ranch, and I think Oro Valley needs to recognize that our public participation toward business yields a certain result, but the market area is bigger than the 50,000 of us who reside here. So really a unique thing, and I've said to developers over the years, I know you don't like it, but that's how it is. It's not going to change. It's not going to change in my lifetime. This community will always show up and express itself.
And that's something that goes back to the very beginning. The contentious meetings really went on for a long time and certainly increased in the 1980s when the town began to expand. So my next question is, what about annexation? The town has gone from 2.5 square miles to 37 square miles approximately in size. Why was that done, and is it a good or a bad thing in your view? Spencer?
Well, one of the contentious annexations I remember was when it was after Rancho Vistosa was annexed, and the original town of Oro Valley around the country club area was already in place, and they were connected by a little strip of Oracle Road. And then there was this large peninsula of county land that was stuck right in the middle between the two of them. And it was surrounded on three sides by the town. And ultimately, I think that's how the annexation came about, because it was being surrounded as it was. It was almost impossible for it not to be annexed in. But there were a lot of fights over what was happening with that. Annexation seemed to be things that bring out the good and the bad in people. And what do they consider to be the most important things in their lives? And who's to say what any one of us are going to say is the thing that we consider to be most important at the moment?
Okay. Kathy?
Well, I look at annexation from a ministerial
Right.
point of view with my job, and that was one of the big things that I helped with, were with town annexations. And as you can see or have heard, we have grown quite a bit. So the way that the town looked at it is that we had the ability to grow the size of the land size, population, and it added revenue for the town to provide services to its residents. And then also, it may still be the policy, but at the time, annexation policy was to annex land that was not developed, so that the developers and the town officials could work together to develop the property in accordance with Oro Valley standards. And the town was very fortunate. We had several annexations that were conducted in that manner. So I think it's been a really good thing for the town. There's no way we would have survived on, 2.5 miles? So I think the town is beautiful in how it's developed, and trying to develop it as close to the needs of the community as the elected officials can make it.
Mm-hmm. A number of you have been here for many years. How would you assess the way the political climate has changed in this town over the years? Maybe, Kathy, you don't want to deal with that one because you were kind of in the middle.
Yeah, since I've been gone for 13 years, it might be kind of hard for me to say, other than the town did experience a lot of growing pains as a small town.
I know you were the one that quote was yours originally in the newspaper.
Oh, okay. Yes, and we had many recall elections, as some of you may remember, from 1993 to 2000, and that was a hard time in the clerk's office, but we got through it. And I think the reason for that is that mainly people were not happy with decisions of the elected officials, or they didn't like changes in the land use that council members had made. That's about all I can say for that.
Spencer, do you see you and your wife were involved in elections here in the early 1990s, and you've seen what's gone on since. Do you see a change here?
Well, I have to agree with Kathy, and there were an awful lot of recalls. Lee was subject to one of them at one point. And what else can one say? The climate really has changed to an extent. I think for the better, but at the same time, it seems like it has picked up less of what we are doing here in the town for our own good, and more of what the national political climate has in the way of influencing us, and a way to kind of separate what's happening from what is the thing that's good for the town of Oro Valley, from what's happening in the national scene, which is an entirely different decision in my mind to make.
If I can say one thing, I was just going to say, Oro Valley is known as a general law town, and it's nonpartisan. So people, they always want to take political sides, but in Oro Valley, that is the nice thing that the council members don't have to worry about, is they're here for the community, not for what political party they belong to. And I think that's a good thing about Oro Valley.
Jim, I go to a lot of meetings to this day, and I've watched some of the behaviors at neighborhood meetings, planning and zoning, about apartments. You know, we're having these conversations about apartments in our community right now, and I'm not weighing in on right or wrong, good or bad, but I think that the national tone does have a tendency to drift down, if you will, that we sometimes lose our civility and we lose our obligation, frankly, to one another, to listen and to be open to compromise and not to question motivation. I think I see a lot of times, I've heard people say, well, you don't care about Oro Valley. Oh, baloney. Everybody cares about Oro Valley. We just may not agree on how the community should proceed moving forward. And I think we got to be careful about that we not become that bitter, angry, frankly, sometimes intimidating environment for the minority voice. We got to be careful about that, because we got so many positives in this community. Can we be respectful in our differences? Can we agree to disagree? And I've been reading too much on that subject lately, and I think it's imperative, especially in the national climate, with a presidential election that's going to be the ugliest thing any of us have seen in our lifetime politically. So let's do our best here.
Thank you. Question about the future. What policies would you like to see Oro Valley pursue in the future? You know, if you had your wish list of things that the town could do, what would they be?
You want me to start that?
Sure.
Thinking about this question, one of the things that I really appreciate was the town working with a private organization to acquire the abandoned golf course and turning it into a public open space for the citizens of the community. So I would like to see more of that kind of activity when such opportunities present itself, that is there a way for the town to actually do this so that it benefits all of us here in the town.
And you know, I'm retired and I don't live in the town, so I'll pass on this question.
Okay, Dave.
I've got 2 points, and Spencer, I appreciate your comment about Vistoso Trails. And Vistoso Trails, I rode my bicycle through there today. I love riding my bike there. I saw a big group of birders out there this morning. I've seen deer, I've seen all kinds of stuff. And the challenge for mayor and council is, how do you pay for that? You know, how do we, it needs 6 figures of investment every year simply to maintain it, to improve some safety considerations. It's a jewel, but how do we pay for that? So I think we've got to keep that in mind, but that's not a policy for the future. It's just the thought that occurs now. The one thing the mayor and I, when I was running the chamber, we used to joke about how little water we used in our households every month. And our goal, Lisa and I, the kids are old and away, and we try to use less than 100 gallons a day. And we're succeeding when it rains right now. And I play around with water harvesting. I got wheelbarrows and buckets, and I'm trying to keep as much water and water my own landscape. And the other day when it was beautiful rain, the storm drain goes right by our house and goes down into the Highlands Wash, which is behind us. And I just watched the water pour into the Highlands Wash. And I said, I wonder if we could catch some of that at street level and maybe move it onto somebody's oleanders or whatever they might be. And I also wondered about stilling some of the water in the wash so that maybe we had bigger mesquites down there, maybe richer wildlife habitat that resulted from a little bit of conservative water management that way. And I believe this sincerely. I think Oro Valley could lead the Southwest in how we deal with our water resources, to include what falls from the sky.
Thank you. This is now the time for the audience. Do you have a question you'd like to ask to the group? And if so, please stand so we can hear it.
Good evening.
Yes.
Okay, two things. I don't think Spencer ever answered the question about the speed trap. I don't know if we ever got back to that, how we got that reputation early on.
Okay.
And could you talk a little bit about how the vote went to annex Rancho Estoso?
All right, so the question is a little bit about the speed trap back in the early 90s and the annexation of Rancho Estoso. Spencer?
Well, I don't know what the vote was on the annexation of Rancho Estoso, so that's just going to be in the public record someplace as to how that one went. But the origin of the speed trap reputation was, as I say, there wasn't any service here in the town. So we needed to have a police force. And we had a citizen volunteer who had a pickup truck. And they gave him you know what the bubblegum machines are that the cops will sometimes take out and they'll stick them on top of the car. He had one of those. And if he saw somebody that he thought was driving too fast on Oracle Road, he'd put that on and chase him down Oracle Road and give him a ticket. And who knows what his speedometer was actually calibrated to be, but it was fast. He thought they were going faster than he thought they should. They got a ticket for speeding. And that's how our reputation came about with that. And then I know Werner Wolf, who was the police chief when we first came here, he fought for years to try to overcome that. And he told us one time, and I think you just saw an article in the paper about 5 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. What happens with that? Werner said he has told his people that if they're 5 miles an hour or less, something to the posted speed limit, do not pull them over and give them a ticket.
Yeah, the town had quite a reputation, partly because they had a fairly aggressive magistrate that was also dealing with that issue and assigning fines, et cetera. But that goes back to the late 80s, very early 90s.
I just wanted to clarify, I think that Marshall Dillon, I think that goes back in the 70s.
Yes.
Before I was with the town.
Yeah.
And when I came to the town, we actually have a former police chief sitting in the audience. Maybe he doesn't want us to know that, but I think just because Oro Valley was so small, and they had time to enforce the law.
Yeah.
And so yes, but I think with Werner Wolf, it was supposed to be don't ticket 9 or below unless there's something else going on besides speeding. But yeah, we have fought that reputation all the way through the years. But
Yeah, well, it's pretty well gone now. How many people here have ever heard that before? Well, some have, okay. All right.
In the 90s, I was told,
Yeah.
go up Oracle and Oro Valley, be sure you watch your speed.
Right. That was sort of the peak of that kind of talk
Yeah.
about town. Other questions? Please stand.
Will you address the history of Catalina State Park, please?
The history of Catalina State Park.
Jim, you're the guy to answer that question.
That's a long talk, but there was and I gave a talk a year or two about that ago. There was a group of about 10 environmental activists. None of them lived in Oro Valley. Oro Valley didn't exist when they got started. And there was a plan announced to build 6,800 homes on that property. And they were all pretty much members of the Sierra Club. And they met at a Sierra Club meeting and they said, we're going to fight this. And they worked over a 12-year period to convince the county and the state to obtain that land. The county bought about 1/3 of the current park, and the state traded land in Rancho Estoso for the other land, the other 2/3 of it. And that's kind of in a nutshell how it came about. I'm part of a group now that's actually looking and trying to get a plaque put in Catalina State Park to recognize those people and what they did. Because again, it's one of those things that's lost in the past now. All the people who were involved, well, 99% of the people who were involved have passed away. And unfortunately, I did not get a chance to interview any of them. Other questions?
The years of the,
Pardon?
when was the park?
The fight was 1970 till it was created in 1982. A big part of it was the fact that Governor Babbitt took office because the previous governor died in office, and the previous governor was against it, and Babbitt was totally for it.
Thank you.
And that was a big turning point in getting it pushed at the state level. Other questions?
I don't
Yes.
have a question, Jim, but that would have been a good time to plug your book.
Oh, yeah.
It speaks to the.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on that goes over in detail. And if you want to read a shorter summary, on the website for Catalina State Park, there's a 2 or 3 page summary of the events, but mine's in a lot more detail. Other comments or questions?
Jim, can I
Sure.
comment about something? And you brought up the speeding issue. And once I was in a chamber meeting, and Chief Sharp, who served us for 20 years, somebody was complaining about his enforcement of the speed limit. And he said, if you don't want me to enforce the speed limit laws, which other laws would you like me to ignore? And when he retired, and I, for some reason, was asked to speak, I said, the truth is that it gets into your psyche that you don't speed here because you think you might get pulled over. And as I get older, I shouldn't drive fast anyway. But the truth is we're safer as a result. The incidence of property damage and physical injury in accidents in our community is lower than it is in places where people are speeding. So one more great thing about Oro Valley, we're subconsciously aware of the speed limit.
Very true.
Sharp, no wake.
Yeah, there you go. That's it.
So do any of the panelists have any final comments?
I just wanted to thank you for having me here. And I have very fond memories and a wonderful career with the town of Oro Valley for 30 years. And although I don't live in the town limits, I still feel like this is my town. So
Yeah.
thank you. Enjoy meeting all of you. Thank you.
I'll echo that. I would just like to add that looking at what's happening with our present political climate, I would encourage all of you to talk to your children and grandchildren about civic duty. Because many in the town here, as we kind of grew up with the town as it was expanding, recognized that if the town was going to go any place, we had to be involved in doing this. But I know some of the young people that I speak with today, they can't figure out which way they want to decide on a political issue, so they decide they're not going to make a decision. And if all of us do that, then we will not have what we were handed by the generations preceding us.
Great, thank you.
Well, that's a great point, Spencer. I appreciate that. And I would just share this. And I ran the chamber for 11 and a half years, and I got paid to tell people how great this place was, but I didn't make it up. I lived in hard scrabble Wyoming for 30 years, and I would respectfully suggest that Oro Valley is the envy of 95% of America. I really believe that.
Me too.
We're sitting here in this beautiful library. There's a piece of public art right there, the reading tree. And by the way, I can see Push Ridge to my left. And we're clean, we're safe. We have this economy is multifaceted, and it's got some terrific fundamental bones to it. And we've got citizen participation. So again, I truly appreciate living here, and I think the future of this place is tremendously bright.
Absolutely.
All right, please thank the panel for participating. Thank you for coming.